All right, it is good to be gathered together again. Had a great time of worship with everybody. I loved looking around at the table and everybody joining in the voices of singing and just knowing that what we're singing isn't just some cool song that's meaningless. It is our story that we are singing. We know that we have victory. We know that Jesus hears us. We know that he's working on our behalf. And I mean, there's so much to rejoice about, and it just enriches the worship all the more. And I was just captivated by watching you guys. Well, today we're going to talk about something that everybody really doesn't want to talk about. I could just close the book and say, okay, we're done. But I'm not going to. It's something that was just talked about a little bit ago. A little bit of a spin on there. It's the word weak. Nobody likes the word weak. All the connotations that go with that, because in general, if you look at the mass public here, the mass people, people are not admired for the weaknesses. From the worldly standpoint of view, weakness is avoided. You see, people have a tendency to respect those and look up to those who are strong. They look up to them and they try to emulate them. They want to be like them, and we want to hear those stories about how they pulled themselves up from their own bootstraps, so to speak, and they learned how to stand on their own 2 feet. And well, people tend to shy away from the weaker stories. In fact, the ones that are looked upon as failures, a lot of people would just rather sweep their stories under the rug and just pretend that it never happened. Let's just concentrate on the good. Let's just concentrate on the uplifting and forget about the weak, because it's something in and of ourselves. Every human being has weaknesses. And so we try to cover it up and we don't address the issue. And when we don't address the issue, other people think, well, I guess I'm supposed to act like I'm happy. I guess I'm supposed to act like I have it all together. I guess I'm supposed to act like, well, nothing's wrong, otherwise I'm looked at as weak. But that's not the way that it is in God's kingdom. In fact, the world is pretty upside down in their way of thinking, because Jesus is truth, right? And so if Jesus is the truth, and we're presented with the truth as we are in his word today, as we're going to get to, then we see that there's something that happens when we admit and when we confront our weaknesses. So I decided to look up the word weak. It means not physically strong. True. But boy, there's a whole litany of here. So I'm going to read it kind of fast. But still, these are words that we'd rather just not look at. Decrepit, delicate, feeble, flimsy, fragile, frail, infirm, insubstantial, puny, unsound, unsubstantial, weakly, which I don't know how that one made it in there if the word is weak. They shouldn't use the same word. Anyways, those qualities don't exactly sound appealing, do they? And yet if we look at the scriptures, we find that it is filled with what the world would look and call upon as weaklings. Scripture's filled with people that didn't have it in and of themselves, and well, they had those qualities that I just described. That's the way that the world looks at them. That's the way that we look at ourselves at times. That's just kind of a common theme all throughout history since the fall of man. So I'm going to list just a few people from the scriptures and how the world, and I want you to think about how people in their day must have looked at them. I want you to think about Abraham. He's a 100-year-old guy with his wife Sarah, and they're childless. Now, to be childless in those days brought tremendous shame, because they had to carry on the family name. You can't carry on a family name if you're childless. And so there's a lot of shame with that. And they had to live with that for decades and decades. And yet God had told him that his offspring would be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Okay? Well, there's nothing in and of themselves that can produce children. You see, their bodies are old, weak, and worn out. So we got them. Or how about the story of Joseph? Here's a good one. He was sold as a slave by his brothers. His brothers didn't even want him. You talk about a nobody. His flesh and blood wanted nothing to do with him. And as soon as he starts to make some headway in this foreign land, his boss's wife decides that she wants him, she wants to sleep with him, and because he's a man of integrity, he runs away, and well, he ends up in prison. Not exactly a success story. So by some accounts, he's looked upon as, well, he's weak. He obviously didn't know what to do, or if he'd have thought his way through that a little better, he wouldn't have ended up where he was. Or what about Moses? Oh my goodness, the guy couldn't speak. He stumbled over his words. How on earth is he going to convince Pharaoh that God wants him to let his people go? He can't even put a sentence together. How is he going to use Moses as a spokesperson? He's weak. He has an inability. What about Naomi? Now this one, you might go, well, who's Naomi? I would encourage you to read the book of Ruth. Wow, what a story. It's a short book, very short book. But Naomi, who had her husband and both of her sons who died, what hope of a future did she have? I mean, everything's stripped from her. Obviously, she is a nobody in society now. Why do we even care about her story? There's prophets such as Jeremiah. He was known as the weeper. Nobody listened to him. Well, what about Hosea, whose wife was a prostitute and kept running out on him? What about Amos, who owned fields, he owned maybe some cattle, and he owned some sheep and stuff, but he's a southerner, and yet he's prophesying to people in the north. Even a priest told him to go back home. Get out of here. You don't even know what you're talking about. But one needs to look no further than the group of Israelites, the weakest of the people groups of the planet Earth. They were nothing but helpless and abused slaves. So what does weak mean? Well,